In this video, we are going to look at a way to calm down the high end when mastering. And this can work quite well for mixing too, especially on buses or instruments that are a bit intense in the upper parts of the frequency spectrum, like drums with loud cymbals or certain types of synths or maybe brass sections playing loudly, things like that. And the method is quite straightforward. We will use some kind of frequency selective compressor and compress everything above 2 kHz. In this case, I'm using TDR Nova and I'm using a high shelving band and have set that to be dynamic. So we're not only targeting the high end, we are also including the upper mids. And I will talk more about why you would want to do that and also show you how to set it up using TDR Nova. First, we can listen to an example and then I will get into the details. And it's quite difficult to make an example that translates well here on YouTube, so I hope that you will hear the effect. But anyway, I think you will get the most out of this video by applying it yourself in your own projects. That's really the best way to try it out and to really get into the details and hear what it does. But I will show you an example here. So first we can listen without the processing enabled. So this is the mix as it is. Sounds like this.
Could this be the moment I say I know that you're the one, I know that you're the one, whoa. I know that you're the one, I know that you're the one, whoa.
And then we can listen with the processing enabled. It sounds like this.
Could this be the moment I say I know that you're the one, I know that you're the one, whoa. I know that you're the one, I know that you're the one, whoa.
And if I exaggerate this effect, we can hear how that sounds.
Could this be the moment I say I know that you're the one, I know that you're the one, whoa. I know that you're the one, I know that you're the one, whoa.
And just a reminder how it sounded without any processing.
Could this be the moment I say
And once again with a sort of normal amount of processing.
Could this be the moment I say I know that you're the one, I know that you're the one, whoa.
So the mix sounds good as it is. It's just a little bit bright. I think the S sounds are a bit loud and the crash cymbals are a bit too intrusive. So by doing this processing, the S sounds and the cymbals get a bit more tucked into the mix. And it's a quite subtle effect, so don't worry if you don't hear it. It's much easier to hear it when you do it yourself on your own material. So why compress the upper mids together with the high end? Why not only compress the high end and leave the mids as they are? Well, if there are specific things in the high end that can be fixed with an EQ or a de-esser or something like that, then that's the first thing I would try. My plan of action for the high end is usually to set the overall tonal balance with a shelving EQ and then use narrower EQ bands to address resonances or build-ups. And if there is sibilance or other issues that are sort of intermittent and affect a limited frequency range, then I would address those with a de-esser or something like that. But sometimes the high end is a bit more all over the place. Maybe it's too dynamic or too messy, or there are no specific frequencies to target with an EQ or a de-esser. Like in this case, the sibilant sounds are quite wide in frequency, so there are no specific narrow band areas to focus on. So we would need a wider approach to address those things. And the thing that often happens if I would compress only the high end is that the balance between the high end and the upper mids will be affected. If the upper mids get relatively louder than the high end, then the mix can sound both harsh and muddy. And vice versa, if the high end gets relatively louder than the upper mids, then the mix can sound both bright and closed or distanced at the same time. And this relation between the upper mids and the high end can vary depending on how much the compressor is working at the moment. So instead of fixing an uneven high end, then I have instead introduced a new kind of problem where the whole upper part of the frequency spectrum, both the upper mids and the high end, sounds unbalanced. And that's where this method comes in. Because if you compress the upper mids and the high end together, then the relative loudness of the two areas will stay the same, and you will keep the overall tonal balance fairly intact. And I would also say that in mastering there are no methods that always work, so this method will be useful sometimes, but definitely not always. For me, I would say I use this method to some degree on maybe 1 in 10 records or so. I haven't really kept score, but it's useful enough to learn, I would say, and add to the tool belt, but it's not something that's applicable all the time. But it's also a kind of processing that is mostly benign, so it doesn't mess up too much of the sound unless you overdo it. So it's something that you can sort of lean into and get benefits from without too many bad sounding side effects. And one thing that can work nicely sometimes is to add a bit of high end before going into this processing. So you enter the smoothing stage with a sound that is a bit on the bright side, and then you let this compression bring the brightness back a little bit again. This can sometimes create a bit of excitement in the high end, make it sound a bit more polished and a bit more detailed. So let's look at some of the details. We have already set the frequency to 2 kHz, and this can be tweaked up or down if that sounds better. It's just a good starting point. Sometimes we want to include also the area around 2 kHz. Many shelving filters are labeled so that the frequency is the center point of the shelving curve, and we will only get half the action at 2 kHz, and sometimes we want that to be more included. So then maybe we could set it a bit lower, but 2 kHz is a good starting point. I like to keep the amount of compression to, say, 2 or 3 dBs of gain reduction at most. It kind of depends also. This kind of processing will soften the sound, and I would usually only use it when the material is too bright to begin with. But there's also a point where it stops being bright and starts being muddy. And in my experience, that often happens around 2 to 3 dBs of gain reduction, but it depends on the material. I like to set the ratio to something quite low, like 1.5 to 1 or so. And this is often useful when the dynamics of the high end is all over the place, so to speak. A higher ratio can work fine as well, especially if the high end is mostly okay, but occasionally get too loud. Like in this case, we could probably get away with a higher ratio as well. The thing to look out for with a higher ratio is that it can sometimes overreact, so to speak, so certain moments can become a bit too soft, and there's less risk of that when using a low ratio. That's something to listen for. And when it comes to the release, I like to have a very short release, in this case 10 milliseconds. That's as short as you can have with TDR Nova. A longer setting can sometimes make the sound a bit too dull or too smooth. But if it sounds too messy or distorted, then it can sound a bit cleaner also with a longer setting. So it totally depends on how the mix sounds to begin with. And the best setting for the attack is very dependent on how the high end sounds. I like to start at 10 milliseconds or so and then move up or down. If the high end is very energetic and snappy and you want to keep that character, then a bit longer attack will often help to preserve that. Something like 15 or 20 milliseconds could work for those things. And if you have a shorter attack, then you will get a smoother and less sparkly high end. And sometimes this will sound more silky and open, but it can also sound too smooth and dull. So it's something you will have to listen for. And the last setting I would like to point out is the stereo link. You can have it either set to stereo so that both channels work together, or you can set it to dual mono, which makes the left and right channels work independently. And that's very much dependent on the mix, which one of those sound best. Sometimes it can sound a bit more exciting and lively with unlinked channels, but if there are bright elements in the mix that are panned not to the center but to the sides, then the unlinked setting can make the stereo image sound more narrow. And in that case, I would link the channels instead. So as with many things in audio production, it kind of depends. I would start with the channels linked and see how that sounds first. And here I am using a high shelving band of a dynamic EQ, but you could also use the upper band of a multiband compressor, for example, and set the crossover frequency to 2 kHz and then use the upper band for this. That's also an option. And I originally got this idea from when I was using the Maselec de-esser, or I was using the limiter, the peak limiter, analog peak limiter from Maselec that had a de-essing section as well. And the de-esser in that unit worked in this way. It was compressing everything from 2 kHz and upwards. So that's what got me thinking and realizing that it's actually a quite good approach for de-essing in mastering, especially when there are more broadband issues with the high end. If there are more narrow issues like S sounds specifically, then a more targeted de-esser for those frequencies would probably be a better option. But this method is quite nice for calming down the whole high end. So that's it for this video. I hope you found it helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.